Hello there. Today I'm taking a look at a Pinot Noir from Chile. This is a wine made a long way south, one of the most southerly Pinot Noirs being made in Chile, in fact probably in the world. This is at a similar sort of latitude to the Otago region in New Zealand, possibly even further south. So the wine is from Vina Aquitania. This is Sol de Sol Pinot Noir, and this is from the Malleco region. Now, Viña Aquintania is a really interesting company, having been founded in 1990 by a couple of the Bordeaux wine industry's real sort of superstars, Bruno Prats and the late Pontallier. And Bruno Prats had, at that stage up until the late 90s, owned Chateau Costes-Dornel, a famous second growth in Saint-Estèphe, and Paul Pontallier was, for a long period, the technical director of the great first growth Chateau Margaux. They'd also teamed up with a French winemaker based in Chile, somebody called Fellipe de Solminihac. And they'd actually been looking for the right terroir to plant since about 1984, but they finally found it in 1990 in a place called Peñalolen, which is in the Maipo Valley. So actually virtually in Santiago, in the sort of the foothills of the Andes Mountains there. And they bought and planted 18 hectares to produce a Cabernet Sauvignon based wine there. They'd completed a winery by 1993, and in the same year they started planting about 650, 700 kilometres further south in this region, Malleco, where Fellipe de Solminihac's father-in-law owned some land. And initially they planted Chardonnay there, producing their first crop of that in the year 2000. But in 1998 they started planting another, what they referred to as short cycle variety, Pinot Noir, one that will, so by short cycle they mean short ripening cycle, to grow alongside the Chardonnay there, and they started planting Pinot Noir. The region's a cool coastal region with quite a bit of humidity coming from the ocean there. It's the high sunshine hours of midsummer are moderated by the fact it's near the cool ocean. However, here in Malleco, there's less protection from a coastal range of hills, so the humidity is a greater issue. But it is a region where these varieties will ripen slowly. So the Pinot Noir here was planted between 1998 and 2002. The initial plantings were a Massal selection. I don't know where that Massal selection came from. Later plantings were a Dijon clone called 777, which my understanding is gives quite dark colour, but actually isn't necessarily earlier to ripen. So I was a little surprised to see that there. The first vintage of the Chardonnay produced was in 2000, and that and subsequent vintages were so successful that they managed to persuade the Chilean government to grant a DO status to Malleco in recognition of the quality of the wines being made there. The vineyards here are on a deep, rich, volcanic red clay soil, and that's quite important because the soil is good at holding water. What you get here is you get winter rainfall of about a metre a year, but during the period December through to March, the conditions are completely dry and arid. So if you haven't got a soil that will hold water and give it slowly back to the plant, you would need dripper irrigation in this region. Now temperatures will get up to 30 degrees here, but at the same time you get cool nights, so down to temperatures as low as 8 degrees Celsius. So that slows ripening, and it also helps the grapes to retain their acidity, and so it gives the final wine some really good balance. As well as the cooling influence of the sea, it's also to be realised that here you get some quite strong winds that again slow ripening of the grapes, cool conditions down. And the result of all this is that you get low yields of very concentrated fruit. Picking takes place in early May, and the fruit is actually processed at their winery in Santiago, so it has quite a long journey. As a result, picking is done into crates that have a capacity of just 10 kilograms, so you've just got one layer of fruit. And the conditions are quite cool, so the fruit isn't going to be hot and become oxidized during transport. It will stay cool until it reaches the winery. So without being crushed, it can travel and be transported and it can reach the winery in pristine condition. At the winery, it's destemmed, it's gently crushed, and it will have up to 6 days doing a cold soak before fermentation is initiated. Fermentation goes on in stainless steel tanks. They're quite small capacity tanks they've got there. And we're told that fermentation is done in the presence of Saccharomyces cerevisiae. I'm assuming that means that there's inoculations going on, but I mean that Saccharomyces cerevisiae could equally have been on the fruit, so that's not very clear in the notes that I've got. Fermentation temperatures, however, are regulated. They're kept down to 24 degrees C, so that's not hugely extractive. And they'll do 3 pump overs a day to make sure that they're taking in enough colour, flavour and tannin out of the skins there. The period of fermentation lasts for about 7 days, although they will, if necessary, allow a post-fermentation maceration for this wine. Malolactic conversion is entirely done in barrel, and the wine is put into new French oak, 100% new French oak. These are 400 litre and 225 litre barrels, and it stays aging in those barrels for 8 months. So not a particularly long period of oak, but quite a lot of new oak there for that short period. So looking at the wine, it only has, according to its label, 13% alcohol, so not particularly high for a Pinot Noir. There's a nice dark ruby red, almost a black red there, but it's not particularly deep. I can see through it quite easily. Possibly the sort of depth of colour can be attributed to that 777 clone. My belief is that it's quite a well-coloured Pinot clone. The 13% alcohol, actually, surprisingly, there are a few tears forming on the glass. Maybe not that many, but you know, there is formation there. But it's not particularly viscous. Let's see what make of the aroma, shall we? There's really quite a rich, deep, dark nature to the aromas there, but at the same time there's quite a lifted, bright perfume coming out from behind that. So it's almost as if there's a sort of a dark plum, a dark red to black cherry note, but also, you know, some lovely lifted perfume. And actually that lifted perfume it's almost sort of floral and soft red fruit, but also that's being sort of peaked up by notes of vanilla, cinnamon, sweet spices coming from the oak, which is giving fairly obvious but quite nice delicate spices there. So that's for taste. On the palate, that's quite rich and meaty in style for a Pinot Noir. It's a very fine structure, plenty of it. It's quite sort of velvety, there's a sort of a chocolatey sort of cocoa powder sort of nature to it. So there's a slight drying nature, a hint of bitterness there, but that's just nicely balancing the relatively juicy sort of dark red cherry notes, perhaps with some slight high ripeness, black cherry to almost black olive sort of notes. You know, there are some savoury touches in there. There are some slightly overripe, slightly raisined hints. There's a richness to the back palate, but because I know the alcohol's only 13%, it's not actually that alone that's giving it. There is this sort of lovely amount of depth and extraction from the fruit. And I suppose also that's where the oak is helping to provide and to fix some tannins in there. So actually the back palate is fairly structured. There's quite a sort of a velvety, and again that sort of cocoa powder sort of note there. But there's enough acidity that the finish has some quite lifted, juicy, it's back there having those sort of deep, dark, really ripe red cherry notes, dark plum, red to black plum. And actually some really surprisingly persistent flavours there. This is a wine that's actually opening up and surprising me as I'm tasting it. And that's really quite an enjoyable experience. The aggregated critics score that we have for this vintage of this wine is 92. Now, I was thinking that was about right, but actually I wonder if this is being a little hard done by. I think there's some concentration, I think there's some freshness, I certainly think there's some aging ability given its structure and the freshness of the acidity it's demonstrating. I'd certainly think for the mid-term, 5 to 7 years, this would develop very nicely, and it would probably last longer than that. Maybe I'm seeing some potential in it that the critics who assessed it didn't, and perhaps I'm wrong, who knows. Either way, I'm finding this lively, interesting. Again, I suppose I would find that this is probably looking to be more in an old world than what I would think of as a classic, juicy, fruit-led, new world style of wine. It has some lovely classic notes, and I think it will develop more of those sort of developed forest floor and savoury touches, which the concentrated fruit should bear quite well. So yes, Sol de Sol Pinot Noir from Malleco in southern Chile, a wine I'm finding really interesting. So thank you so much for joining us. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, do please press the like button. If you would like to watch more of our tastings, it would be fantastic if you would subscribe to our channel. We'd really appreciate your support there, and that way you can set yourself an alert and be notified every time that we publish a new video. If you would like to share your thoughts with us on the wine, do please pop those in the comments box below. We'd be really interested to hear your views about the wines we're tasting, the tastings we're doing, or anything else that relates to that. If you have friends who you think would like to watch the video, please feel free to pass it on to them. We'd really appreciate that sort of endorsement coming from you. I'll leave a link in the comments box below to this vintage of this wine on the Wine Searcher website, and that way you can go to that and you can see where the wine's available in your market. You can also use the tabs on that page to find out a little bit more about the winemaking, about the producer, about the region, about the grape variety. There's a tab there for the vintage. There are tabs where you can compare to other vintages of this wine. You can look at the pricing history. There are other tabs that will show you what the critics have to say about the wine, what awards it's won, and the ratings that other users on the site have given it. So hopefully that's a resource you can use to find out everything you need to know about this wine. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us, and I do hope you'll manage to make some time and come and join us for another video in the very near future. Till then, bye for now.